Hi. Is this on?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? I'm amazed to hear about this 700-to-1 ratio of dark money that you're up against. That's a fascinating number that more people need to hear about. And I am really interested in your comments because everything we hear about Common Core is it was formed by the state governors. So it is a state-run program. And I'd like a little bit more background on that to counter that.
Okay. And it's a long story, but basically, 2009 is about the first time I heard. It goes back a little bit further. I believe the actual origins of the National Governors Association started when Janet Napolitano was governor of Arizona, and she was also president or chairman or whatever they call it of the National Governors Association. And this conversation started about creating higher standards. And there's nothing wrong with that. We want the best for our children, but the reality is we have always had standards. We just didn't call them that. We knew when a child came into kindergarten, they had to learn their numbers, they had to learn their letters, they had to learn how to put the sounds together to read, and the numbers to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. We call it was curriculum then, but now we call it standards, and we've kind of divided the two. So they sent out this kind of an initiative, I guess, if you will, that they wanted higher standards. Well, there was a group called Achieving. They've been around for a very long time. They're a not-for-profit. They basically brought the people together to write them. It wasn't, to me, to say the standards development was state-led. To me would mean we brought 10 people from Arizona and 10 people from here and from here, there, everywhere. And the states truly, their educators came together on an agreement of what these things would look like. That's not the case. These were developed by lobbyists, testing company people. There were actually two groups. One was a group that wrote the standards. The other was a group that was to evaluate them and basically certify them. The two curriculum experts that were on the certification group basically said these are not good. We don't think they should be in all our schools. And the writing group, really, there was a gentleman from U of A that was involved with them, mathematician, I think he's a mathematician. But really, they weren't content experts that came together and wrote these standards. They were testing company people, publishing people, lobbying people. Those are not the people that should be writing our standards. They were never field tested. If you're going to change something about our children aren't guinea pigs. So you don't put it in all across every school in the nation. You do a small little group and say, does this make it better than what we were doing before? Because I have a picture I'll share with you in the reception area of my office, and it's a water wheel. And the reason I chose that is because to me that's always been very symbolic of a child's education. If you do something and what you've done is wrong, you can't get that time back. That child never gets third grade back if we've done something very wrong using a fad in education. And we use many fads, unfortunately, in education. Common Core is a fad to me. Common Core is a fad that's not about making children's education better. It's about selling new books, new curriculum, new tests, new professional development for teachers. Why does a math teacher, someone who's been teaching math, who under the old system, No Child Left Behind, was highly proficient, we call them highly qualified teachers in their content area, why do they need to learn how to teach math again? Math has not changed. So it's really marketing talking points are what's being sold. They've been internationally benchmarked. No, the company that wrote them can't prove that. They've been tested. No, the company can't prove that. They were written by a state-led group. No, they weren't. The states didn't lead the group. I have the list of people that were involved in all this. The things they're telling us just aren't true, but would you let them anywhere near your children or grandchildren if they said, oh, we just pulled these things out of a hat and this is what we're going to do now? We reinvent education every 7 to 10 years in this country, and in my opinion, it's more about selling product than it is about making things right for our children. And to me, that's very, very wrong.
Diane?
Selling books, selling.
In my opinion. I might be a little jaded, but.
Diane, I believe you are the only statewide candidate. The only statewide candidate in the primaries that won every county for the Republican Party. Is that correct? Statewide?
I'm not sure if Jeff DeWitt did or not. I know I won every county. I'm not sure if Mr. DeWitt
every
did.
county, and that statistic really tells the story of your campaign and the reason you were so effective.
We can't hear you.
And I want to let you know that I watched you day in and day out show up and spread your message. And I want to thank you so much. You're so effective. I do have a question for you. And that is, Diane, you've stressed how more and more offices are becoming under the wing of a bureaucrat. They're a bureaucrat. You can't vote for a position. So what's your suggestion for when we can't vote for someone, less and less we can vote for someone, and we have to depend, for example, on you being superintendent of school, working with the bureaucrat. What can we do to get our message out and support the candidates who we see are really doing their job?
Well, I think, and Michelle, Representative Ugenti, did a wonderful job talking about that. You know, just the things you can do during a campaign, you know, walking, knocking on doors, putting out signs. But even now, as we go through the trials and tribulations, I mean, it might be a surprise, but gee, a lot of what you read in the papers just isn't true. You know, if you know something's wrong, write a letter to the editor or post something up on a blog or whatever it may be. Personally, I don't read those things anymore. It's a little bit too stressful, but you know, helping getting the word out, and I think what you talked about was so important, that sphere of influence. We all have friends, we all have family, we all have people that we talk to on a basis, and just say, you know what, no, that's not so. I know that's not true, and this is what it is. And of course we want to do that always in a kind and loving way, because these are people we care about, but we still need to make sure that we don't let the lies continue, because there are very many of them always.
Yes, Madam Superintendent. I have a question. I agree with you totally that the fact that we need to educate our students. But when does it become indoctrination of our students? When you have groups like Raza, and more specifically the Golan schools, where there's 10 of them in Arizona now, teaching Islamic studies and preaching to children that they need to learn more about Islam than about any other religion, whether it's Judaism or Christianity. And we as taxpayers have to pay for the books in these schools. When does this stop, and when do we make that divide?
That is, interestingly enough, one of the double-edged swords of school choice. And believe me, I am absolutely a proponent of parental choice in education, because I believe to the depth of my being that God gives children to parents, not to government bureaucracies, no matter how well-intended that government bureaucracy may be. But one of the things that has happened from our choice movement here in Arizona is charter schools, and charter schools that are able to open up, that are privately funded, and some of them are not privately funded, but are for-profit schools, and part of, do they have an agenda? You know, I assure you that to the best of my ability, that we will look and apply the same law that's being applied in Tucson to every school in Arizona, and make sure that they're not teaching what they shouldn't be teaching, which is hate of America. They have a microphone.
It's okay, I don't need one.
Yeah, but he's got it back
Oh,
there
they have,
right now.
okay.
Good morning, Superintendent. Thank you. I'm just interested to know what your administration, you use you yourself plan to do with Teach for America in the state of Arizona as it relates to special needs children. We've seen the failure with Teach for America with low socioeconomic children. Those parents did not have a voice and still today do not have a voice. We put the least qualified person in the classroom with the most needy child. But we would not allow that to happen in suburbia America. And I would just like to know why we make a rule change for certification for Teach for America. They only have to give 2 years. We give them signing bonuses when budgets are tight. And I'm 37 years in this profession, and no one paid for my graduate studies. And I'm just curious where you stand with that so we can protect our special needs children. As a special education educator and director, I want to see them with the most highly qualified person.
I agree with you on that. I'm not a big fan of Teach for America, so what we can bring to the board, I will. Certification, I think all teachers, I mean, we did a little tweak in certification. This is an aside for teachers that are moving into the state, giving them a little bit more time to meet some of Arizona's requirements. Things like that I don't have a problem with. But saying one group of teachers can certify in one way and another can certify in another, I don't agree with that. I think we need to look more closely at teacher certification, and of course that's part of the Department of Education. We need to ensure that our teachers are content area, you know, and I know teachers work very hard every day. I don't envy them sometimes the job that they do. It's a no-win situation. You have your children who are, you know, some are there especially as you talk about children with special needs or low poverty children, you know, it sounds kind of like a cliche, but you have children who are coming into the class each day and you don't even know if they've had breakfast. You know, we were talking actually through the charter school board. I sit on that board also. And we had a charter school operator came and talked to us. I can't remember exactly the status of their charter, if it was a non-renewal or if it was up for renewal or what status it was in. But they gave a compelling argument about these are children who the night before there may have literally been a murder right outside their door. I mean, what do you do with kids like that? We have to have ways to face all of these issues and make sure these children are offered the same opportunities because they can succeed, excuse me. In America, we know they can. And I'm kind of getting off the subject of your question, but you know, we talk a lot about global education. And we talk a lot about benchmarking to countries that have phenomenal test scores because their kids are phenomenal test takers because that's what they do. They literally, first of all, they take the kids and start sorting them out at younger grades. If by this grade you haven't done this, you're not going to be on this career path. You know, if by this grade you haven't done this, it's been determined for that child. You're going to be a this, a this, a this, or a this. What we have in America is we have a system that allows every child to be what they want to be. As they determine their destination in life with themselves and their parents and hopefully the help of a school, a classroom, a teacher, a district that can help them do that thing. But we never, and I realize in a perfect world it doesn't always work this way, but really we don't say to a child, because you're low income or because you failed this one test or didn't do well, that's it, your future is over. You know, as we're trying to move our system, it seems, to one that is competitive with a testing environment that they have in other education systems around the world, those countries are looking at us and saying, how did America become the leader of the free world? And I do believe it's our education system. I believe it's the education system that allows every American to be whatever they want to be. And that's something I don't ever want to see us lose in this country. I'm not sure that's quite the answer you wanted, but to cut to the chase, I don't believe in special circumstances for certain groups.
Go ahead, ask your question.
Diane, I was an Army brat. It was one year.
You a brat? I can't imagine.
I'm still a brat. I'm spoiled rotten. Yeah, he knows. He spoils me. There was one year I went to 4 schools in the same year. One year I was like, oh, I went through this a year ago. The next school, it was like, what? I think standards are great. It would be even greater if they actually held the students to them. But the problem I have with Common Core is you say Common Core, people say standards. It's the evil behind the standards. I'm sick about the data mining. I'm worried about the sick agenda with their curriculum, what they wanted to teach. The founding fathers are all racists. All this ugly stuff that's hiding behind the facade of we need standards. Can you speak to that?
Well, like I said a little earlier, we have always had standards. We just didn't call them that. We know, again, I use this example, that if a child comes into kindergarten, if they don't know their letters, their numbers, you have to start there. The next step is you teach them the letter sounds, those go together so they can learn words, and then words become sentences, and 1 + 1 = 2, you add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Those things have always been consistent. Those things were happening when I was in school, we just didn't call them standards. That we had this commonality. And one of the challenges, I'll try to touch on all the things I remember you mentioning, Judy. We talk about one of the reasons we have to have Common Core standards is, as you talked about, that children move across the country and they move. Well, the reality is, and I think the most recent statistic I heard is that it's about 1% or less than 1% that truly move, across the nation. We may have more within a state of children moving from district to district, but it's not as pervasive. It is an issue for the military. But another comment, or the comment that I would make on that, I believe that it's my responsibility as a parent. We moved here, I told the story earlier, we moved here from New Jersey back in 1990. Our daughter was 3 years old, so she wasn't in school yet. But if we had chosen to do that when she was 8 or 9 or 10, I think as a parent that would have been my responsibility to make sure that if there were gaps in her education, that I got her what she needed to make sure she was where she needed to be, or if she was ahead, make sure she gets moved up. So parental responsibility, in my opinion, is an element of it too. It's the job of the district/school/teacher to teach the children. It's a parent's responsibility, and I believe it's a God-given responsibility to make sure their children are well educated. So, and yes, I do agree, but a lot of this stuff that you're concerned about is not new to Common Core. It's been going on for years. We started changing our teaching of history, civics, and geography in the 60s when I was in school, into that conglomerate thing called social studies, and we've been weeding it out further and further and further. If you go back, and I've been studying education for a long time now, if you look, the people who are behind this change of direction in our education system, and one is a name I'm sure many of you have heard, John Dewey. He's still idolized in our colleges of education. Well, his underlying premise was to change America, to change the American society through the public education system. So we have to be ever vigilant about these things and make sure our children get the knowledge that they need.
What about the data mining?
Oh, I'm glad you asked about that. I'm very concerned about the data mining also. It is a discussion that we have very frequently at the Department of Education. I'm very fortunate, we as Arizonans are very fortunate that the gentleman who's in charge of the IT department for the Department of Education is a parent and shares that concern with all of us. I mean, there is a good place for data in education. And what we're working with as the department, and to keep the safeguards on, is our view is the data belongs to the parents. The parents and teachers are the only ones that can see identifiable data to a child. And the purpose of the teacher seeing that is if a child goes through testing, and I don't know whether you can take a look at it and say, well, this child's problem, not just that they're getting a D in math, but now we can use the testing to say it's fractions that is the problem this child, it's adding fractions or subtracting fractions, whatever it may be. That's the problem this child's had, so that you can pinpoint it and make sure they have the knowledge and understanding they need. The problem is it going the other direction, that the federal government would ever be able to take a look at Johnny and say, this is what's going on with him. And we just had this discussion this week. I had my IT guy in and I said, I know what we do, and we talk a lot about how we safeguard data in the department. We don't look at it that way. We don't have access to it that way. It's in the aggregate. It's only as it goes back to the schools that teachers and principals can see a specific student. But we make sure that it's not there and doesn't go anywhere further that way. I believe it's something we have to be ever vigilant about. We can't ever stop looking at that issue. And I assure you, as long as I'm in that office, we will never stop looking at that issue and making sure we're protecting the data. But do I believe the federal government wants to see it that way? I absolutely do. I talked a lot about this during the campaign. The Department of Labor, the Federal Department of Labor, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. I mean, they have it right on their website, and it says that their goal is to use the state's data systems to be able to follow a child from their earliest school years up to, through, and including their work life. When did your employment ever become the business of the federal government? So we will be ever vigilant about that because, and now just a little happy news, my daughter and son-in-law made us grandparents in December. We have a little grandson. So this is not just a theory to me. This is protecting my grandson's future too. So I assure you I will be as diligent for every child as I am for him.
Hey Diane, you and I talked earlier. This is not going to be exactly the same question. My name is Larry Hagan. I'm a professor of economics and mathematics at one of our universities. I also teach at Mesa Community College. I'm a former teacher at Saguaro High School. I've taught at charter schools and public schools. And so I'm kind of immersed in education for the last 20 years or so. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was in an 8th grade class, and I was given, substituting in an 8th grade class, and I was giving out an assignment to the students. And some of the students were just goofing off and not doing anything. And I went to one student, and I said, you haven't even got your name on the paper. What's going on? I said, he said, I don't want to do that. I said, well, you got to do it. I said, you're going to be right back in here next year. He said, oh, no, I don't have to do this. They can't fail me. And I said, wait a minute, what is it? So I started doing some research. This is how long I've been doing some research. And I've talked to other states. I've talked to school teachers and principals and everything else. I'll ask a question to the audience when you've seen this. How many of you in the audience realize that in Arizona, an 8th grade student can fail every class and still get promoted to high school? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and 5. The most important one is up there. So for a few years now, I have been talking to legislators and trying to figure out how we're going to address this issue and what's going to happen. And I want to give a public kudos to John Kavanaugh, my state senator, and Jay Lawrence, my state rep. And we have formed, we'll call it a study group. Should we call it that, Jay? A study group. And we've had some meetings down at the state legislature with the Board of Education. I remember the last meeting we had at the Board of Education, and we said, why are these students getting into high school? You know, what's happening here? 40% of our students are failing the math Ames test. in high school. How are they getting that far? And people from the board said, oh, well, we have these standards and they're set up and we do this. And I stopped. I said, stop. It ain't working. Whatever you're doing, it ain't working. We're trying in our little study group to hopefully draft legislation in the fall to set up some standards for promotion from middle school to high school. How is that going to work? What do we have to do, and how would you guide us in that idea?
And say, you have the committee, you tell me how it's going to work. And I'll do that. I mean, I think we need...
What you're doing. Thank you.
I think we need to take a look at some of the legislation that's on the books right now, and predominantly right now it's a teacher that makes the determination whether a child will be passed to the next grade or not. And even a school board, a parent can appeal to the school board in a district, but the school board cannot, let me back up and say this right. The school board can't just arbitrarily say we're going to pass that child along. I mean, I guess they could take a vote for anything. But what the law says is that in order for the school board to override the teacher's decision, the parent has to bring compelling evidence that the child has mastered the material that the teacher has said they've not, and they're using it to retain them. So that was always the vote I made, because believe me, as a school board member, you hear a lot of, I promise my kid will do better next time, and you know, we're going to get this tutoring and we're going to do these kind of things. But if they haven't put evidence in front of me that, you know, they had to add fractions and they can prove they add fractions, you can't override that. So, you know, that's kind of the converse of what you're talking about. Why are teachers recommending children to be passed along when they haven't really done what they've said they would do? And boy, you know,
We'll work on it in the committee.
please, and serious recommendations, because one of the things I don't want to see is I don't want it to be a quote-unquote high-stakes test where you just take a snapshot of a child by a test that was created by a company that has nothing to do with Arizona. And if the kid has a bad day, their whole future getting into high school hinges on that. But by the same token, we have to make sure there's accountability in that system. That, you know, does it become an end-of-course assessment? We use those in Peoria, and we had a standard. If they didn't reach a certain standard, you know, then they weren't getting a passing grade, and we did keep them in 8th grade if they needed to be. I mean, maybe a piece of that is what is the onus we put on local school boards. I'm kind of thinking rhetorically and out loud here, but I think what we need to look at first through your committee is where are we right now? How exactly is that happening? And what are the right steps we take to move from that?
Go ahead. Ask your question.
Hi, Diane. I'd like to know what can we do for you so Newsy let you do what we the people vote for? So how can we really say enough is enough? You should be in the same bus as Diana is, because the people are spoken, not the money.
Well, one of the things some of you who are still silly enough to subscribe to the Arizona Republic might have seen an article. We filed suit yesterday, and it's not against the governor. The governor is not involved with this suit at all, but it's a matter of the authority between my office as superintendent and the State Board of Education. Basically, we have a board meeting on Monday, and they've put an item on the agenda that basically says that their executive director, who's actually an employee of mine, has full authority to do all administration. Well, that's the superintendent's under the law. So the only way we're going to resolve this issue, we tried to do it through a piece of legislation that would have kind of taken the employees that serve the state board and put them over with the state board, although quite frankly, how a state board that's an appointed board and only meets once a month can supervise employees under Arizona employment laws is beyond me, but we were willing to make that compromise. Well, clearly the legislature and my constituents told me loud and clearly they did not support that effort. And I believe you might have heard a word or two about the citizens of Arizona not wanting that bill to go through. Well, since it hasn't, we are still where we were, and as things have become untenable, now we filed in court. So we'll let the courts declare, you know, who has what authority over whom, and that's what we need to do. And I appreciate any support and voice you can lend to that, to whomever, state board.
Yeah, ask your question. Ask your
I'm
question.
sorry.
I kind of wanted to back up what has been said earlier. I'm from Washington State, and I went through the school system there in the 60s. And after military time and a police career, I came to Arizona in 2002. Came to this church in 2009. I formed a men's Bible study. We meet at my house weekly. And I got to noticing that I had noticed all for years Arizona has been consistently a conservative state. And looking back at it now, I was never taught in school, in all the years up there in Washington State, I was never taught states' rights. I had never heard of it. I had never heard of what the states were for or the Gettysburg Address. We were never taught the Constitution. I even went to college up there, and we studied constitutional law, but not the Constitution. So I'm telling you, this goes back a long, long ways, and this is an undermining of our culture. The reason I bring up the Bible study, a lot of the guys that go to my Bible study were born and raised here. So one night we were just kind of jawing back and forth, and we were talking about things political, and I got to talking about this thing about the lack of teaching up in where I was from. And two of the guys that were born and raised here said, well, we started learning about the U.S. Constitution and the Arizona Constitution in what was called junior high back then. So by the time we got out of high school, we knew them both backward and forward. So we understood what states' rights was. I didn't even hear about states' rights until Senate Bill 1070 was passed. And I listened to Jan Brewer defending it on the basis of states' rights. So that's how weak our national system is. I'm glad to be in this state. To me, this is one of the last free states in the country, and we're being targeted by the federal government for it. And that's why we're getting hammered. The sheriff's getting hammered. Jan Brewer got hammered. I'm sure that our new governor is going to get his share of it, and we have to stand strong.
I agree. I would just comment to that, and I agree, it goes way back. As I mentioned, it was, you can go back 100 years ago and follow the, for lack of a better term, the movers and shakers in education. And their underlying premise was they wanted to change American society, and the best way to do that is through the school system. We heard it from Reagan, you can hear it from Hitler, you know, get children for a generation, you know, or even 4 or 5 years, and you can change the philosophy of a country, of a nation. We moved here, as I mentioned, from New Jersey, and we moved here to raise and educate our daughter here because we knew we would have a better life here. By every measure you could possibly measure a family and bringing up a child. And New Jersey has always been one of the top spenders in education. Even 20 years ago, they were spending a lot of money. But we wanted her educated here because a lot of the things you talked about, you know, that they were teaching the Constitution here. They were teaching a more conservative type of education, if you will. New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the first states that introduced into the classroom in textbooks, Heather has 2 mommies. You know, we wanted our daughter raised with our values and our beliefs. So, and we felt we had more latitude and more freedom to do that here in Arizona. And that's the thing I want to protect for future generations of Arizona children.
Hi, Diane. Thanks for all the wars you've been through and you won. And
I would just say to everybody here, one of the things you can do is pray for this lady and also write a note via the snail mail or email and encourage. And that's what I tell my friends that are concerned. Couple of things. One, I'd like you to touch on if the article given to me by my neighbor, because we don't take the paper, about the erasures on the test. I'd like you to speak to that and what that is really all about. And then the other thing is, this morning I caught an article on the internet about Arnie Duncan and what he thinks about our schools being extended. And since you mentioned that you just heard from him, I wondered if he talked anything about that when you were with him. Extending the hours, 13, 12, 13, 14 hours. Maybe this has come up just since Baltimore, to try to address the schools addressing the problems with children that are caught up in violence, et cetera, et cetera. And the article literally said Arnie Duncan would love to see something almost like boarding schools, which is really scary. I thought, what next? So since you said you just heard from him.
Okay, first of all, the erasures. This is something the department does every year. We do standardized testing, whether it's the Ames test or if we do AZ Merit. A lot of it's computerized now, but some are paper and pencil tests. There's a way that the test score sheets can be looked at, and we can do this by eyeball, by looking at them, or as they're run through a computer to be graded, they can tell whether an answer has been erased, and particularly if it's gone from a wrong answer to a right answer. And they have statistics, people that do that thing have all kinds of statistics on stuff like that. And they look for anomalies, and that's what we had happen here. And I think here in Arizona, there were maybe 7 school districts, and there was one that was really bad down in southern Arizona. I mean, the statistics were off the chart on the number of wrong answers that were changed to right answers. We in the department cannot investigate that. I mean, we can look and see, yes, this happened, there were these wrong answers that went to right answers, but we don't have the type of investigation to make a judgment call on that. So we felt, and I don't believe this has ever happened before, what's happened before is the department analyzed it and said, yes, we agree that these wrong answers were changed to right, and then we would disqualify those test scores. That's a punishment to a child. Now, and maybe the child didn't do it. It might have been whomever. I'm not casting aspersions on anyone. But the child's penalized because the score is disqualified. But the school can also be disqualified because we have to test 95% of the students in all these different categories of students. So it may impact their funding. So what we've done, and it hasn't been done before, is once we substantiated that yes, this in fact did happen, then we sent it over to the Attorney General and just told them to review it. They can review it, they can see if there's charges involved, because at least theoretically, if 95% of the students have to be tested, when they're tested, that 95% can be tied to additional funding. So if wrong answers were changed to right answers and that impacts funding, that's fraud. And that's a criminal charge. That's not something that the department can or would try to determine. But if you followed the news, you'll see it was in Atlanta, I forget how, hundreds of people were sent to jail because that's fraud for funding. So we're not making a judgment call on that. We've just presented them the stuff, saying this is what we've seen. Attorney General, you have the right people to determine, how that happened. So that's where that'll move forward. I had not seen Duncan's article. I know a big talk when I was back in Washington was early childhood. And there's a lot of talk about extending early childhood to pre-kindergarten, things like that. And even all day K, A lot of people like it, a lot of people support it, and I do too, as long as it is not mandatory. Because you know what, as a mom, I was fine with my daughter going to kindergarten, but I was fine with a half a day. I felt after that half a day, she was better off with me, and that's, I believe every parent is entitled to make that choice for their child. So the push is more early, but when you see the, shall we say, philosophy of Washington, D.C., does it really surprise anybody that they think children are better in their care than they are in the parents? I vehemently disagree with that.
Yes, I had a question about, you may have mentioned it already, but just last week, the children in one of the high schools in Seattle walked out on a test. They refused to take the test there. And I think this is what you're going to see on the national trend. They are not going to take the test. Their parents are supporting them. What are your comments about that? And then we'll probably have 2 more people speak, so we want to continue.
I think I've made it kind of clear I am in favor of parents' rights and control over their children's education. And what we have told people from the department, we're under the we're under the rule of an Attorney General opinion that goes back to Tom Horn. He made it once under, I guess it was under Ames, and then when we came out with the new AZ merit, he reiterated it as AG before he left office. That in statute, and forgive me, I'm not going to remember exactly which number statute it is right now, but there's a statute in Title 15 that says parents have the right to opt their children out of instructional material, activities, and there's kind of a laundry list of things they can opt their children out of. Well, testing and assessment is not one of those things. So Mr. Horn's opinion was, since it's not listed in statute, that parents do not have the right to opt their children out of testing here in Arizona. I believe that parents have far more rights than we ever list in statute, and that statute is representative of some things that parents may opt their children out of, but parents have an inherent right to opt their children out. So from the department, we can't go against the Attorney General's ruling. He is our lawyer, and we have to go by what he said then, and we weren't able to get a new opinion from AG Bernovich in time for testing. But we just wanted parents to just do what you do for your children. You know, we can't legally tell you to opt them out. We wouldn't tell you to break the law. But if you're a parent and you know your child's being tested on that day and your child doesn't come to school on that day, so be it. You know, that's the way that it will be. We hope that we can get new laws that will substantiate parents' rights more fully here in Arizona. One thing I think the former Attorney General did not take into account when he made that ruling was that there's also Arizona Revised Statute, I think it's 601 and 602, that clearly says parents make all educational choices for their children here in Arizona. So that should have been factored into that opinion. It wasn't, so we'll keep working on that too. But Mark, parents, God gives children to parents.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Diane.
Hello.